All right, so welcome to another deep dive. Today we're diving into the Palworld lawsuit.
Right, yeah.
Nintendo and the Pokemon Company, they're taking on this indie game, Palworld. And
Yeah.
they're saying basically that it's copying a little too much in the Pokemon franchise. So we've got articles, we've even got like a Reddit thread to dig into.
Yeah.
This is a lot to get into.
Yeah, and what I think is so interesting about this is it's not really about like the characters or the storyline or anything like that. It really comes down to
That's the mechanics.
the mechanics.
Yeah, the fundamental actions that players take.
Right. And like speaking of mechanics, Palworld actually just changed how players summon their what do they call it? The pals, right?
Pals, yeah.
It used to be like this whole spear throwing thing, but now they just kind of like hold the sphere out. It feels like a pretty clear response to the lawsuit. What do you say? Oh, almost certainly. I mean, one of Nintendo's patents covers the specific action of throwing a sphere to release a creature.
Wow.
So, them changing it while a little awkward is a smart move, from a legal standpoint.
It is kind of funny, though, because like even in the Pokemon anime, trainers sometimes just hold out a Pokeball to like return a Pokemon.
Right.
It's like,
Gotta have
how much do the lawyers actually know about like these games?
Yeah, it definitely shows some of the complexities of intellectual property law, especially when you're talking about something like video games that's so dynamic and creative.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is causing a lot of debate about how much protection companies should even have over these very basic game mechanics.
So speaking of those mechanics, there are 3 patents at the heart
Yeah.
of this lawsuit, right?
Yeah.
Bounding into comics, they lay them all out, and some of them were surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one is a patent for a success rate indicator for catching monsters.
Okay.
So you think about the shrinking rings you see in Pokemon.
Oh, right.
Another patent covers using your creatures for fighting or gathering resources.
Okay.
Pretty standard feature in both games.
Yeah.
And then the third is this patent for riding monsters as transportation.
Okay.
Where the game will like auto switch which monster you're riding based on, if you're like on mountains or whatever terrain you're on.
Okay, so the first 2, like that seems like, pretty common game mechanics. But like riding a monster, you can patent that.
Yeah, I mean that's the question that a lot of people are asking, and this is kind of what's so interesting about this case. I mean, it seems like on the surface, you're patenting something so basic, but Nintendo is arguing that it's the specific implementation of this mechanic. It's how these all these elements come together to create a very unique player experience. That's what they're protecting.
So it's not just like throwing the ball; it's like the whole sequence of like throwing it and catching the creature and then,
Right, yeah.
releasing it.
It's that Pokemon way of doing it, not necessarily just, the very, very basic actions themselves.
And that's where it gets kind of tricky, because it's like, where's the line?
Right.
Where does it become like unique?
Exactly.
Exactly. And this is where Japanese patent law comes into play, right? I've heard that it's a bit different than, other countries.
It is, yeah. So Japan's patent system is known for being much more lenient in terms of what can be patented. Even if it, seems pretty straightforward to you or me, it might be patentable in Japan.
So even though these mechanics seem really basic to us, they could have like more weight under Japanese law.
Exactly, yeah.
Interesting. So that adds like another layer of complexity to this.
Absolutely. And it raises really important questions about how international intellectual property rights are navigated, especially in a global industry like video games.
Yeah.
So what might be considered fair game in one country could be, totally different somewhere else.
Right. Okay. So we've got these patents. We've got the backdrop of Japanese patent law. But let's not forget about, the people actually playing these games.
Gamers, yeah.
The gamers, yeah. I mean, that Reddit thread is exploding with opinions on this, and it seems like a lot of people are siding with Palworld.
Yeah, it's understandable. I mean, the gaming community thrives on creativity and innovation, and there is a real concern that, lawsuits like this, it could stifle that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that, like Nintendo's being a bully sentiment going around. And some people are even pointing to Temtem, right?
Yeah.
It's another Pokemon-like game. And so far, Nintendo hasn't gone after them.
Right. Yeah. And that Temtem comparison is really interesting because it raises the question, is Nintendo targeting Palworld? Because they see them as like a legitimate competitor, not
Right.
necessarily just because of the game mechanics themselves.
Right. Like maybe they're trying to protect their market share more than
Exactly.
their IP.
And I mean, the fact that Palworld recently partnered with Sony, who is a, major rival
Mhm.
to Nintendo, probably doesn't help matters.
Yeah, this is getting very dramatic. You know what I love about like the Reddit thread though?
What's that?
Even with like all the legal jargon and all that, there's this amazing like sense of creativity.
Oh, yeah.
People are coming up with like the wildest ideas
Yeah.
for how Paul World could change their game to like to not, to avoid infringing on these patents.
There's definitely a we'll find a way spirit in those
Oh
comments.
yeah.
It really speaks to the ingenuity and the resilience of that gaming community.
Yeah, and some of those suggestions are just like hilarious. Like one person suggested using a catapult,
Yeah.
like to launch your pals into battle. Can you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, it really highlights the absurdity of trying to patent certain actions in a video game, right? I mean, it's like saying you own the concept of jumping or running.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? This whole case feels like this big tangled mess of legal stuff, opinions, creative solutions.
Yeah, it is. And I think, the outcome of this lawsuit could have like really huge implications for the future of game development.
Yeah. So we've got Nintendo, right, and they're trying to protect what they see as their
Mm.
intellectual property. We've got the gaming community who's pushing back, right, and they're worried about what this could mean for indies and future development.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Pal World right in the middle, just
Right.
trying to like make a fun game.
Right, trying to navigate this whole legal minefield while still creating something that's engaging. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it is. And as we go further into this, we're gonna explore those arguments, dissect the patents,
Oh, yeah.
and really try to understand all the nuances of Japanese patent law, because this isn't just about Paul World.
Mhm.
This is about the future of creativity in the gaming industry.
So stick with us. This deep dive is just getting started. I mean, it's easy to look at this and be like, "Ooh, the little guy versus the big corporation,"
Yeah.
but protecting your IP is a big deal, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, imagine, years of work, you finally develop this really cool, unique mechanic that everyone associates with your brand.
Hmm.
You're going to want to protect that. The question is, where do you draw the line between protecting what you've created and maybe stifling other people's creativity?
Right, and it's like, I don't know, throwing a ball to catch something, it's not exactly revolutionary. I mean, people have been doing that in games forever. Right, and that's the core of the argument here, right? So Nintendo's argument is that it's the specificity of the mechanics. It's not just throwing any object. It's the whole sequence of actions. It's the visual cues, the sound cues. All of that creates this player experience, and they're claiming that whole package, not just the individual parts.
So they're saying it's like the Pokemon way of doing it
Mm-hmm.
that's unique, not necessarily like just the basic action itself.
Right, yeah. And of course, the other side is saying, well, no, these are just building blocks of game design. These are common mechanics that developers should be able to use and adapt.
Mhm.
And they point to a ton of other games with similar features, right? They're saying, well, if you uphold Nintendo's patents, that could be a really dangerous precedent.
That's where that Reddit thread gets really interesting, because people are bringing up like Monster Hunter, they're bringing up Skyrim, Slime Rancher, all these games where you're catching or collecting things, and people are like, well, what's next?
Hmm.
If Nintendo wins this, can they go after every game with like a fishing mini game?
Right. That slippery slope argument is a real concern. I mean, the courts really have to consider
Hmm.
what the impact of this decision could be, right? It's all about finding that balance between, protecting what's genuinely innovative, but also, allowing game design to kind of evolve naturally.
Right, and isn't that where Japanese patent law comes into play again? I know we touched on it earlier,
Uh-huh.
but it feels really important to like understanding what could actually happen.
No, it's crucial. Yeah, Japanese patent law, it's known to be more lenient than a lot of countries.
Yeah.
When it comes to actually granting patents. So, something that might be considered obvious
Mhm.
or generic somewhere else, it could be patentable in Japan.
So even though like we look at these mechanics and think, oh, that's pretty basic, under Japanese law, it's totally different.
It could be viewed very differently, yeah. And that's what's so interesting about this. It really highlights, how difficult it can be to navigate intellectual property law, especially when you're talking about a global industry like video games. I
Hmm.
mean, something that's entered fair use in one country could be a legal nightmare in another.
Right. Okay, so we've got Nintendo and they've got their patents and their arguments. We've got all these gamers worried about what this could mean for creativity. What about Palworld? What about the developers? Where do they stand in all this?
Yeah, I mean, initially, they were pretty defiant. It was like this was a fight for creative freedom. But I think, this recent change to the summoning mechanic suggests maybe they're shifting gears a little bit.
It's like they're trying to, I don't know, find a compromise or something.
Yeah.
Like appease Nintendo without completely, changing their game.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, removing that sphere throwing action
Hmm.
directly addresses one of the main patents in the lawsuit, so it could be a very strategic move to weaken Nintendo's case and maybe even open the door to, some kind of settlement.
It's got to be tough, right? Like,
Yeah.
you want to stand up for what you created,
Yeah.
but you're also going up against, like, a giant in the industry.
Oh, yeah. It's a classic David and Goliath situation, and even if Palworld were to win this thing, the legal fees alone could be crippling for a small studio.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? These legal battles are expensive no matter who wins. It makes you wonder how many, like, potentially great games never get made because, developers are too afraid to even try.
Yeah, it's a legitimate concern, and this case really shows just how imbalanced things can be. Bigger companies, they have the resources to just pursue legal action, even if they're not sure if they're going to win.
Hmm.
But smaller studios, they're often fighting an uphill battle.
So where does this leave us? Like, what are the possible outcomes of all this, and what could it mean for game development as a whole?
Well, one possibility, of course, is that Nintendo wins,
Mm.
and the courts completely uphold their patents.
And what would that mean for indie developers?
I think it could have a chilling effect, right? You might see developers less willing to incorporate even some common game mechanics
Just out of fear of being sued.
out of fear of being sued, yeah.
That doesn't sound good. I mean, wouldn't that mean less innovation, less creativity?
It's a very real concern. Imagine a world where developers are, constantly second-guessing themselves,
Mm.
afraid to take risks or try anything new. You could end up with this very stale and homogenized gaming landscape.
So basically less fun for everyone.
Potentially, yeah. But even if Nintendo wins, it's important to remember that the courts, they could put some limitations
Yeah.
on how those patents are applied. So it might not be that they can just shut down any game that uses similar mechanics, but maybe, they'll establish some clearer guidelines.
Okay, so maybe not a total disaster, but definitely something to watch out for. What about the flip side? What if Palworld wins?
Ooh, that would be huge. A win for Palworld would be a massive victory for indie developers everywhere. I mean, it would send such a strong message that creativity and inspiration shouldn't be limited by overly broad patents.
It'd be a real, like, underdog story. It could, like, embolden other small studios to take more risks
Yeah,
and challenge the bigger companies.
absolutely. Yeah. And it could lead to just this like burst of creativity in game development.
Hmm.
Right? Developers would feel more confident about, borrowing, adapting existing mechanics and creating, something completely new and exciting.
So more cool games for everybody. That sounds good to me. But there's also, like, the middle ground, right?
Yeah.
There's the possibility of a settlement.
That's always an option, yeah.
Yeah.
Both parties could agree to some kind of compromise. Maybe there's some licensing agreement or Palworld agrees to make some modifications to the game.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be as dramatic as a win for either side,
Hmm.
but it could be the most I guess practical way to handle this.
It would definitely allow Palworld to, continue development while also acknowledging Nintendo's, intellectual property rights.
Mhm.
And it could actually set a precedent for, future cases. Maybe it would encourage more collaboration and compromise
Right.
and less of these costly legal battles.
Right. So no matter what happens, this whole case, it's kind of setting a precedent for how IP is handled.
Yeah.
in the gaming world.
It is, absolutely. This is a pivotal moment. It's forcing everyone to really look at, the balance between protecting your work and making sure there's still room for creativity and innovation.
Yeah.
I mean, these are tough questions, and there aren't any easy answers, but they're questions that we have to address.
Right. Okay, so we've gone through all the arguments. We've looked at the patents. We've even dipped our toes into the fiery opinions on that Reddit thread. Now, the big question is, what happens next? Like, what if the courts actually side with Nintendo on this?
Well, I think a big win for Nintendo could have some serious consequences, especially for indie developers. I mean, imagine like a world where everyone's, constantly worried about getting sued, even for using common game mechanics.
Yeah, that sounds kind of scary, actually. Like people would just stop taking risks.
Exactly. You'd probably see a lot less experimentation, less variety in games, and ultimately I think it would just be a less interesting, less exciting landscape for everyone, really. And it wouldn't just affect indie developers either, right? Bigger companies, they might start getting more risk-averse too. We could end up with fewer games that really push the boundaries.
So, yeah, like a loss for everyone, not just the little guys. But okay, so even if Nintendo wins, the courts could still like limit how far those patents go, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe they can't just like shut down every game that has similar mechanics.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. The courts could set some clearer guidelines for what, actually counts as infringement. And that might be a good thing in the long run, right? It would give everyone a little more certainty, a little more clarity about, where the lines are.
So maybe not like the end of the world, but definitely a sign that things are changing. Okay, but now let's flip it. What happens if Palworld actually wins this thing?
Oh man, a win for Palworld. That would be huge. It would be a real victory for, creative freedom for all those indie developers out there. And I think it'd send a really powerful message, it'd say, hey, you can't just shut down innovation and inspiration with, these overly broad interpretations of the law.
It would be like the ultimate underdog story.
Yeah.
Like it could give other small studios the courage to take on the big companies, really push the envelope.
Absolutely. And I think you could see this, like, the surge of new ideas, new game mechanics. People would be more confident, taking inspiration from other games and coming up with their own unique twists. The possibilities would be endless.
Man, that would be pretty amazing to see. Okay, but let's not forget there's also the middle ground here, right? There could be a settlement.
Oh, absolutely. A settlement's always possible, and it might actually be the best way to resolve this whole thing. Maybe Palworld agrees to, I don't know, tweak some of their mechanics, or maybe they work out some kind of licensing agreement with Nintendo.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be as exciting as a big courtroom victory, but it could be the most sensible approach. Everyone gets to save face and move on.
Exactly. Palworld could keep developing their game, and at the same time, it would acknowledge Nintendo's, intellectual property rights. And who knows, maybe this could even set a precedent for future disputes, encouraging more of a collaborative approach instead of these massive legal battles.
Right. So it sounds like no matter what happens, this whole case is going to have a big impact on the gaming industry. It's like it's setting the stage for how these things are handled going forward.
It really is. It's making us all think about the balance between protecting your work and fostering a culture of creativity. And these are complicated questions, right? There aren't any easy answers. But these are questions that we need to grapple with if we want to see gaming continue to evolve.
No, that's a great point to end on, I think. This case, it's not just about Palworld and Nintendo. It's really about the future of gaming. It's about what kind of games we're going to be playing, 5, 10 years down the line. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.